Welcome everyone. Today we will be talking about spiritual intelligence. Spirituality. We hear this word a lot and often it is confused with religiosity. Now, what is the spirituality? Spirituality is the basic feeling of being connected with one's complete self, others, and the entire universe according to Metroff and Denton. It refers to the individual search and experiential elements of the sacred deep meaning, unity, connectedness, transcendence, and the highest human potential, according to Emmons and Worthington. Often we talk about the intelligence quotient, emotional quotient, and so on. What are these quotients? In fact, if you go through the history of intelligence testing and the quotient that we talk about, early 20th century talked about IQ with reference to the rational intelligence, the intelligence quotient. In mid 1990s, you all might have heard the name Daniel Goleman, very famous name that. He talked about EQ. From early 20th century, we now move on to IQ, we now move on to EQ. EQ refers to the emotional intelligence, the measurement of emotional intelligence. EQ is a basic requirement for the use of IQ. EQ refers to the feeling aspect of it, and IQ refers to the thinking aspect of it. Now, later on, people also started talking about the third Q, that is spiritual intelligence, measured as spiritual quotient. What is the spiritual intelligence? This is the intelligence with which we address and solve problems of meaning and value. The intelligence with which we place our actions and lives in a wider, richer, meaning-giving context. It's a necessary foundation both for IQ as well as EQ. And this is supposed to be our ultimate intelligence. SQ allows us to be creative. It changes the roles, alters the situations. It allows us to dream, aspire, and see the uses and limits of both understanding as well as compassion. Understanding and compassion are not so easy. But SQ allows us to understand both the utility, the uses, as well as the limitations of both understanding as well as compassion. EQ allows us to judge a situation and behave appropriately within that situation. SQ allows us to ask if we want to be in it at all, or would I rather change it or create a new one? This is where your SQ is important. IQ, EQ, SQ, all these correspond to three distinct neural arrangements in the brain. IQ and EQ models are supposed to have two layers, if we have to talk from this perspective, neurological perspective also, and also a behavioral perspective. If we talk about those layers of personality, IQ and EQ models have two layers. Outer rational conscious personality and EQ refers to the inner unconscious one, if you talk in terms of the layers of personality. Now, what is SQ then? This is the third layer. This is supposed to be the central core of personality. So, when we talk about this thinking of human beings or rational beings, rational human beings, and the type of intelligence associated with it, there is what is called the serial thinking. And this is measured by IQ. And serial thinking, which is denoted by IQ, is all about logical and rational thought processes. Associative thinking, this has EQ as the underlying factor. It helps with your psychological mental connections, associations. And unitive thinking is the creative, intuitive, and insightful one. And this comes from much deeper within an individual's personality, which is called our personal center. And this is where SQ comes into the picture. While we learn and understand with IQ and EQ, it is the SQ which gives us the ability to create and invent. We hear a lot about the terms related to spiritual intelligence. People keep talking about spirituality, spiritual belief, and whatnot. Now, what are all these? Let's first talk about spirituality. The individual search and experiential elements of the sacred deep meaning, unity, connectedness, transcendence, and the highest human potential. This is what is spirituality. Spiritual belief refers to, for example, you may believe in God, and there may be spirituality associated with that as well. Spiritual intelligence integrates these subjective experiential themes of spirituality associated with meaning, your sacred experiences, your interconnectedness, and the transcendence, and applies them to the tasks involved in your living. Spiritual intelligence leads to enhancement of functioning, adaptation, and well being, to produce products that are valuable within a culture and a cultural context, or for that matter, a community. Now, we in a little while ago, I said religion, and I said people confuse between religion and spirituality. What is the distinction? Spiritual intelligence, which is connected to the spirituality as we have so far seen, spiritual intelligence is defined as the ability to apply, manifest, and embody spiritual resources, values, and qualities to enhance daily functioning and well being. Religion, on the other hand, is usually focused on rituals and beliefs with reference to the to what is sacred within institutional organizations, and spirituality, on the other hand, refers to individual experiential elements of meaning and transcendence. So, having talked about religion and as different from as distinct from spirituality and spiritual intelligence, let's talk a little more about spirituality as per the definitions given by certain well known names. The basic feeling of being connected with one's complete self, others, and the entire universe is what Mitroff and Denton have said. It refers to the individual search and experiential elements of the sacred, deep meaning, unity, connectedness, transcendence, and highest human potential, is what Emmons and Worthington have summarized. So much talked about spirituality. What must be the components in spirituality? Spirituality is beyond our ego self or a constricted sense of self. It may be defined as having two components. One is the vertical component and the other is the horizontal component. Vertical component refers to something sacred, divine, timeless, and placeless. A higher power, source, ultimate consciousness, or any other language that the person prefers, whatever you want to define it as with reference to these. Desiring to be connected to and guided by that source that we have been talking about, which is considered ultimate by you. That is where the vertical component comes into the picture. Horizontal component, on the other hand, is being of service to the fellow humans and to the planet at large, to the society around you, to people who are connected to you directly, indirectly, and to the society at large. Universally, you will be of some service. So that's a horizontal component. So vertically, in terms of your connectivity to the ultimate source that you have belief in is one, whereas connecting to the humans and offering your services and being of some support to them is another. Vaughan says a spiritual intelligence is a capacity, moving from spirituality to spiritual intelligence now. Vaughan says spiritual intelligence is a capacity for deep understanding of existential questions and insight into multiple levels of consciousness. Wallman says the human capacity to ask ultimate questions about the meaning of life and to simultaneously experience the seamless connection between each of us and the world in which we live. This is what is spiritual intelligence, according to Wallman. Zohar and Marshall say that spiritual intelligence is an ability to access higher meanings, values, abiding purposes, and the unconscious aspects of the self, and to embed these meanings, values, and purposes in living a richer and more creative life. This integrates the subjective experiential themes of spirituality associated with meaning, sacred experiences, interconnectedness, and transcendence, and applies them to the tasks involved in living in order to enhance functioning, adaptation, and well-being to produce products which are valuable. This is considered, the spiritual is considered, spiritual intelligence is concerned and is considered as the intelligence of harmony, peace, and equilibrium. But when we talk so much about spiritual intelligence, what are the qualities of spiritual intelligence? These are the native qualities of consciousness itself. And these are experienced at the subject pole of attention in moments of presence in the form of wisdom, compassion, integrity, joy, love, creativity, and peace. By identifying with that consciousness itself, instead of identifying with the states of the body and mind, we activate that spiritual intelligence and thus we experience its qualities. This shift in identification corresponds with the shift from ego to soul. Spiritual intelligence, therefore, is looked at as intelligence of the soul. Now, what has spirituality? What does it have to do with organizations? What is this organizational spirituality? In a research correlating workplace spirituality and performance, Zerkiewicz and Gaklon, they suggest a positive link moderated through greater employee motivation, commitment, and adaptability and flexibility towards organizational change. They propose the values framework for performance enhancing workplace spirituality. What are those values? Benevolence, generativity, humanism, integrity, justice, mutuality, receptivity, respect, responsibility, trust, and the like. Coming to the spirituality in the workplace. Spirituality in workplace can bind employees to the company and enhance their job performance. Furthermore, organizations that offer spiritually oriented goals provide opportunities to experience higher sense of service and greater personal growth. These in turn lead to better teamwork, organizational commitment, and ultimately performance. Spirituality at work can be understood as the recognition that employees have towards an inner life that nourishes and is nourished by meaningful work that takes place in the context of community. It's mutual. Spirituality at work addresses three aspects pertaining to inner life, meaningful work, and community. Three components: inner life, meaningful work, and community. The spirituality performance connection is enabled by leaders who possess a strong spirit friendly orientation. Indeed, the leaders in the better performing units showed higher spirituality scores than the leaders in lower performing units, according to studies. Let us look at this table over here. There is a grid which you are seeing out here. You see the higher self or ego self-awareness, which talks about, this grid talks to you about the spiritual intelligence or the SQ skills. Higher self or ego self-awareness refers to awareness of one's own worldview, awareness of life purpose or mission, awareness of values hierarchy, complexity of inner thought, and awareness of ego self or higher self. Then there may be higher self in terms of ego self-mastery. One, we talked about self-awareness, ego self-awareness, and second, we are talking about self-mastery. We will also, from self-awareness, we will also move to universal awareness, and from there we will move to self-mastery, and from there we will move to social mastery, which is the spiritual presence. So we have talked about ego self-awareness. Let us now talk about a larger awareness, which is universal awareness. From self-awareness, let us move on to universal self-awareness. This involves awareness of interconnectedness of all life, awareness of worldviews of others, breadth of time perception, awareness of limitations, and power of human perception. It also refers to awareness of spiritual laws. It talks about experience of transcendent oneness. Let's also talk about the higher self in terms of ego self mastery, which I mentioned a little while ago. Commitment to spiritual growth, keeping higher self in charge, living your purpose and values, sustaining your faith, seeking guidance from higher power or higher self, all these refer to ego self mastery. From ego self mastery, let us now move on to social mastery or the spiritual presence. It involves a wise and effective spiritual teacher or mentor, a wise and effective change agent, someone who makes compassionate and wise decisions, a calming, healing presence, and being aligned with the ebb and flow of life. Let's talk a little more about workplace spirituality. Defined as a sum total of force and energy of all employees' spiritual intelligence within the organizational culture, including the group's behaviors and their commitment to positive outcomes in the organizational structure. That's what shows the workplace spirituality, according to Whitmore. To invigorate and revitalize the organizational culture and structural outcomes, heightened employee intelligence, and it also shapes employee behavior towards higher levels of productivity, performance, effectiveness, and efficiency. This is what will be the outcome of workplace spirituality. How does it help? It helps in all these ways. It helps to invigorate, it helps to revitalize the whole organizational culture. It helps in structural outcomes and heightened intelligence of employees. In addition to that, also shapes employee behaviors towards higher levels of productivity, performance, effectiveness, and efficiency. Let's briefly talk about certain perspectives on spirituality driven organizational performance. When the organization is driven by spirituality, what will be the outcomes? What are the various perspectives related to it? Let's talk from a human resource perspective first. Spirituality enhances employee well-being and quality of life. Very important from the human resources perspective, From a philosophical perspective, spirituality provides employees a sense of purpose and meaning at work. And from an interpersonal perspective, spirituality provides employees a sense of interconnectedness and a community feeling, that we are all one kind of feeling. Looking at the practical application of spiritual intelligence, it is something which everyone has. It's not that not all people do not have it. Everyone has. But a few learn to develop it. That's where the difference is. Rational intelligence, on the other hand, it manages facts and information using logic and analysis to make decisions. And emotional intelligence, as I said in the earlier slides, is necessary to understand and control one's emotions and feelings while being sensitive to the feelings of the others as well. We are going to talk about this emotional intelligence extensively in another module, in another lesson. Coming back to spiritual intelligence. Why is it necessary? When is it necessary? How is it necessary? Spiritual intelligence is necessary to find and use the deepest inner resources from these resources comes the capacity to care and the power to tolerate and adapt. Today, when we talk about the intelligence in general, we talk about the capacity for adaptation. It's not just the academic achievements which are considered as components of intelligence anymore. We move ahead. We now look at the adaptation as well. So, spiritual intelligence is necessary to find those inner resources which are deeply embedded, from where the capacity to care, the power to tolerate, the power to adapt, all these come from there. It's necessary to develop a clear and stable sense of identity. It's necessary to be able to discern the real meaning of events and circumstances and be able to make work meaningful. It's necessary to identify and align personal values with a clear sense of purpose. It's necessary to live those values without compromise and thereby demonstrate integrity by example. It's necessary to understand where and how each of these that we have been talking about are sabotaged by the ego, which means being able to understand and influence the true cause, not something which your ego determines or dictates to you. In organizations, it's important to have effective managerial leadership. So, how does spiritual intelligence contribute to this effective managerial leadership? The spiritual qualities and themes, such as confidence in the meaning and purpose of life, a sense of mission in life, and the vision for the betterment of the world, that tie into the inspirational elements of leaders and to those models of leadership that highlight the leader's role in defining and mobilizing meaning. In all these, spiritual intelligence becomes important. Researchers have explored the spiritual dimensions of leadership by proposing what is called a transcendental leadership theory, which you are aware of, that hierarchically integrates and extends the transactional and transformational theories of leadership. So, transcendental leadership comprises of three dimensions of spirituality. One is consciousness, second is moral character, and the third is faith. As leaders grow in their spiritual development along these dimensions, they develop greater awareness and intuition along the consciousness dimension and are guided by the internalized set of universal values along the moral dimensions and are more inner directed along the faith dimension. These developments lead to what is called internal locus of control as against the external locus of control. And when there is a greater inner locus of control, there is a greater leadership effectiveness. Side by side. Let's also look at the components of spiritual intelligence and the effective leadership. Effective leaders generally manifest greater self-awareness and self-knowledge. Remember, we have talked about these components of spiritual intelligence a while ago. Effective leaders may manifest greater self-awareness as well as self-knowledge, and they exhibit inner directedness in the form of creativity. Studies suggest that several SQ abilities relating to meaning, intuition, self-knowledge, and self-awareness, as well as that egolessness, not being driven by ego, and humility may contribute to effective business leadership. Mind you, all these qualities that I have been talking about are not easy. They have to be worked with. Efforts are needed in order to develop these qualities. And we already said skills can be developed. Are we working towards it? Is what we have to introspect and see. How do you integrate spirituality into leadership? Is it integrated? There is an increasing interest in integration of the spirituality into business leadership in order to articulate and mobilize meaning and to provide inspiration as well as motivation to the employees who are working in that organization. Leaders lead by articulating a vision and mobilizing meaning. The dissemination of meaning happens through symbolic management like metaphors, like stories and others. And these communicate a set of beliefs as well as values. This symbolic management is done through evocation of emotion. These leadership paradigms go beyond what is termed as, that's why, transactional leadership, that involves managing and manipulating rewards. This is more than that. There is what is called as spiritual leadership theory, SLT, which contains three main qualities of leadership. First, the vision. Vision defines the destination and journey, reflecting high ideals and standards for excellence. Altruistic love is the second quality, and this provides for a sense of wholeness, harmony, and well-being produced through care, concern, and appreciation for self and others. Hope or faith, which fosters endurance, perseverance, do what it takes attitude, reaching for stretch goals with an optimistic expectation of victory and excellence is the third quality. So we talked about three qualities: vision, two, altruistic love, third, hope or faith. A sense of meaning and calling in one's work and organizational membership in turn supports organizational commitment, effort, as well as productivity. And this in turn leads to organizational effectiveness, as you all pretty well know. We talked about organizational effectiveness. Let us now talk also about employee engagement. What is the contribution of spiritual intelligence to effective employee engagement? Spiritual intelligence integrates subjective experiential themes of spirituality associated with meaning, sacred experiences, interconnectedness, and the transcendence that we talked about, and applies them to the tasks involved in your living. The intended outcome then is to enhance functioning, adaptation, as well as well being to produce products that are valuable within a cultural context or a community. As spiritual intelligence includes the ability to utilize trans-rational modes of knowing, such as intuition, CEOs, the top leaders, who can use multiple levels of consciousness that transcend the linear and logical thinking, may indeed make better decisions. And they can solve problems from a more holistic perspective and more effectively. Incorporating spirituality at work provides organizational members a sense of community and connectedness, and thus increases their attachment, loyalty, and belonging to the organization. Providing employees a sense of community and connectedness, which I have mentioned about, is critical in today's workplace and corporations. Feeling a part of the community and sharing a common purpose are two dimensions that have been frequently associated with workplace spirituality. A sense of connection or interconnectedness to something larger than oneself has also been considered as an important part of spirit at work. The consequences of spiritual experiences at work are discussed in the literature, including higher levels of employee attachment, loyalty, and belonging. Consequences of spiritual relationships include intimacy, wholeness, authenticity, altruism, and integrity. Let's look at a few perspectives of spiritual intelligence. 5 different perspectives are derived from the literature on how spiritual intelligence influences organizational behavior, leadership behavior. We have been talking about all these, right? So organizational behavior, leadership behavior, employee well-being, culture, and support organization performance. So what are those 5 perspectives? We'll briefly look at them. Spiritual intelligence enhances employees' emotional intelligence and social intelligence. Spiritual intelligence improves employees' quality of life and well-being. Employee with high spiritual intelligence as well as emotional intelligence exhibits a sense of purpose and meaning for their life and hence work in a more integrated way. Spiritual intelligence transforms employees to feel a sense of interconnectedness and socially make them feel socially responsible. Spiritual intelligence fosters the evolved and inclusive behavior among employees and leaders. I repeat, evolved as well as inclusive behavior among employees and leaders, both employees and leaders from both the sides. So let's briefly talk about practical steps toward a better SQ, enhancing our spiritual intelligence. Zohar and Marshall, they recommend 7 practical steps toward a better SQ. Become aware of where I am now. Feel strongly what I want to change. Reflect on what my own center is and on my deepest motivations. Discover and dissolve the obstacles. Explore many possibilities to proceed forward. Commit myself to a path and remain aware that it is not just one path, but there are many paths. And the characteristics of such a spiritual workplace when you are committed to spirituality are it emphasizes sustainability. A spiritual workplace emphasizes sustainability. That means being aware of limited resources, exercising caution in areas of production, commerce, design element is carefully taken care of. Values contribution to operate with a blend of service and responsibility in providing your goods and services. Encourages creativity, that is, it fosters innovation in line with changing business cycles, products, and technology upgradation. It promotes vocation, providing opportunities for utilizing other latent skills of employees, encouraging employees to pursue their passion. It helps in developing principles, supports formulation of ethical principles that promote personal growth, long-term character development, and personal connections of faith and work development. Contribution of spiritual intelligence to effective managerial leadership would be in terms of transcendental leadership theory, which we have talked about. There are three dimensions of spirituality according to this. One is consciousness, second is moral character, and the third is faith. We have discussed about this as well. The purpose of spiritual leadership then is to create vision and value congruence across the individual, team, as well as organizational levels, all these levels. To enhance spiritual well-being through the calling and membership of both leaders and followers. To foster higher levels of employee well-being, corporate social responsibility, as well as organizational performance. This, in turn, entails creating a transcendent vision of service to key stakeholders wherein leaders and followers experience this sense of calling, that is, life has meaning, purpose, and makes a difference. Second is establishing an organizational culture based on prescribed values of altruistic love and other spiritual values, where leaders and followers have a sense of membership, feel understood and appreciated, and have genuine care, concern, and appreciation for both themselves as well as others. So, let us briefly talk about one particular firm where we find these elements that we have talked about being incorporated. The source being People Matters, Dr. Ritika Srivastava in 2017, this has been written. So the management and consulting firm McKinsey and Co. might be a strange place to find meditation happening. But the company is embracing meditation as a part of new HR strategy aimed at keeping employees happy and healthy. In one case, a meditation program developed by McKinsey for an Australian client saved the business more than $20 million. So let's conclude. Transition between the old definition of work as survival and the new definition of work as livelihood is what we are seeing today. New management techniques and new organizational structures are needed to handle such an emerging context. Our job is to facilitate the discovery of spirit, to esteem it, to celebrate it, and to hold others accountable for their expression of it, and support employees to fully express their spirit, their life purpose, and the gifts that they possess. Thank you.